Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I am Ben Snyder.
And I'm Joe Barnhart, and we want you to know that this is a program of diversity of opinion. If you are a person who thinks that you can question, like, are you an atheist or are you not an atheist? This is an open inquiry. We can talk about religion free of supernaturalism. Benjamin.
This is a call-in show. However, we have only one phone line. So if you can't get through, we invite you to email us questions live at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meet-up, often at a bar or eatery. Sometimes we even do karaoke. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's for happy hour tonight after the show for food, drink, and conversation. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty at Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to visit our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
Okay. And also the monthly activities of the Rationalists of East Tennessee, you want to look into those. The Sunday mornings have lectures or round table discussions. On the fourth Sunday, reflections, people gathering together with potluck and a conversation. And on the second Sunday, they have a book club review. So good discussion, people.
Visit our websites for the additional monthly program details, including times and locations. Today's show is on biblical composition, a humanistic look at the Bible. But first, some news.
We're going to get to the news now, or?
Yes.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
All right. First of all, the Reason Rally is coming up this weekend.
Oh, God.
The Reason Rally is an event sponsored by many of the country's largest and most influential secular organizations. It will be free to attend and will take place in Washington, D.C. on March 24th, 2012 from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. At the National Mall. There will be music, comedy, speakers, and so much more. We hope you can join us. Speakers will include Dr. Richard Dawkins, Tim Minchin, Eddie Izzard, Adam Savage, Jessica Alquist, who's the high school who's recently in a court case over her over trying to get her school to take down a banner that promoted religion. Taslima Nasrin, Paul Provenza, James Randi, Lawrence Krauss,
James Randi. Oh, good. Yeah.
and a band named Bad Religion.
Okay. Well, let's get to our topic, huh?
Okay.
So what is our topic?
Today we are talking about the composition of the Bible.
Yeah, how did the Bible come into being? And it's a humanistic view of the Bible. What does that mean, a humanistic view of the Bible? First of all, I think it means the fingers of human beings at least wrote it. That's very minimal.
Yes.
There is a passage in the Bible that God wrote such and such. It's with the finger of God. But then there are other passages in the Bible say God is spirit, so I guess that has to be taken figuratively. Although it may be some of the ancients believed their God did walk and had fingers and would walk in the cool of the evening.
And could actually feel and had a physical presence.
Not only had emotions and thoughts, but also had physical features.
Attributes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a big controversy when you say people were created in the image of God. Did they believe that God had a certain physical feature? Most scholars today think, that gradually changed to mean you had a big debate. If it were physical features, how long were the ears and what color, and that would be quite a controversy.
What skin color would God actually have?
Yeah, so
what does that mean for other humans that don't have that color?
So it's and there were even many who believed God did have a body and he was exceedingly tall. But there never some debate as to how tall. I guess over 80 feet is enough.
Yeah. And I think the Mormons actually believe that God does have a physical body and lives in the universe.
Yeah, yeah. And I always wondered about that. God, with the kidneys and toenails, do they grow? But now all you do is you take theology and you see, well, where does it go? That's what science does with its theory. See where it goes. And then science says, well, we've got a problem. I think we better revise it. Mm-hmm. And if it gets really in trouble in science, you say, we need a better theory.
I think it was Christopher Hitchens who once put it that religion was our first and worst attempt at philosophy, science, cosmology, just at trying to understand things in general. And I think we could say that about any older idea.
Yeah.
Any idea about anything is an attempt to explain something.
Yeah.
But what we find within certain systems of belief that have been carried through time is that they don't want them to change, or they may change, but people not realize it and think it's wrong for them to change.
Yeah, you have the Greeks with the Iliad, and then the Odyssey. Plato did not want young people to read some of the Greek literature because he thought the gods were immoral, and it would be a bad influence. And there are parts of the Old Testament I don't particularly would want my kids to read at an early age, or my grandkids, because there are some passages in the Hebrew Bible, and the book of Revelation is, of course, a pretty violent
there's a lot of
and we got enough violence on television. We don't need. If you put the book of Revelation on television, you'd have a lot of parents saying, we don't need this.
There is violence. There's
so
physical violence, and then even some sexual aggressive violence.
Yeah, you got a Song of Songs. So I guess you could say there are wonderful things in the Bible, and there are horrible things in the Bible because it's a human book.
Right.
It's about you and me. And what I like to see what you think about this is it's very easy for us to be contemptuous of ancient people because they didn't have the advantages of Galileo and Copernicus and Darwin and Newton. And so they had to think hard within their framework, which is all we do. Now, say 200 years from now, people look upon us and wonder. You see?
Right. There is cultural criticism that can overstep its bounds. Several times when talking with theists, who, especially when talking with Christian theists about the Bible, and talking about the idea that there are good and bad ideas proposed in these works written by humans that they attribute to their gods, there is a distinct difference. If I were talking with you, and we both agree that there's good and bad in this, and that these people are clearly attributing what they think should be right to a god, and they're just working with their limited understandings, then that makes sense. But when talking with Christian theists, the problem that tends to arise is that they don't look at it that way. They look at it as, God wrote all these.
It depends on the theists.
It does depend on
Let
the
me give you an
theists,
example. I asked my New Testament teacher once, I said, you have in Galatians, the 2nd chapter, Peter and Paul, and their views are very much opposed. And I said, now, if you read the Gospel of Mark, it looks as if that Gospel of Mark represents Jesus' view, then Paul was in cooperation with Jesus, whereas Peter wasn't, but presumably, in the Gospels written after Paul, Peter supposedly was a disciple, you see, and yet he didn't get it. And so by the time you get to the 10th chapter of Acts, Peter's got to get a revelation right out of heaven that agrees with Paul. So I asked my teacher about this, who's a very good scholar. He said, well, Peter was a little stupid. that was his position.
It is important, as you were noting, to clarify that not all Christians, or not all theists even in general, are of the same mindset. It is very important to consider that.
We forget that. One of my good friends says the early Christians were Baptists, and I said, well, they must have been. Look at all the disagreement among them. and of course, he got the point. His view is if you get 4 Baptists together, you'll have 10 opinions, and that's okay. That's what they fought for. That's called the priesthood of all believers.
Paul, what you were mentioning before about Paul and Peter being in disagreement, and Paul writing first. Paul did write about what in a book called "Who Wrote the New Testament?" I think it's the making of the Christian myth by Burton L. Mack. He talks about that Paul identifies Peter as being a part of one of the Jesus movement known as the Pillars of Jerusalem, and we only know about that movement thanks to Paul. And it's interesting because Paul writes prior to the Gospels of Mark and Matthew. And Mark, when you read Mark, Jesus is flaunting some of the rules of the Jews that you should or shouldn't do this. And when you read what Paul's talking about when he talks with the pillars, there's an issue of whether or not Gentiles need to be circumcised. And according to Paul, he doesn't think so. He doesn't think that the purity laws necessarily apply to the Gentiles. And Mark seems to have that mindset as well. And then when Matthew comes around, the author of Matthew seems to be defending Jesus because he has him in the Sermon on the Mount saying, you must keep the Torah even better than the Pharisees. And really tries to, it seems, redeem Jesus from the Markan view in that respect. And so then you have Luke having Peter, Luke, a Gentile author apparently, redeeming Peter from thinking that...
Well, let's take that circumcision notion then. So you could take a position that these people, like you and me, are trying to solve problems. And here's Paul. Well, first of all, about 150 years before Paul, you had a Greek warlord coming in and going into the temple and offering a pig, offering pork.
Antiochus.
Yeah, Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth. And this was a terrible affront.
Yes.
And desecrating the temple from their point of view. And of course, outlawing circumcision. Now, what is interesting?
The Torah as well.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting to me is Paul, 150 years later, seems to be doing the same thing, but from a different perspective. Now, what's happening? See what you think of this. Is Paul is in a Greek-Roman world as a Hebrew.
Yes.
And he wants to keep his Hebrew tradition, but he has to live with Greek neighbors and who speak Greek, and he writes in Greek and sends out letters in Greek.
Right.
And he's in the Roman Empire. So circumcision, if you're going to try to convert males to your new religion, circumcision seems to be
a stumbling block.
A stumbling block.
Right.
So there's a passage in the Hebrew Bible talks about circumcision of the heart, and turns then into something like a metaphor.
In inward purity versus an outward sign of purity. It's interesting, as you pointed out to me before, that it does seem that Paul has succeeded in doing what Antiochus originally sought to do, which is remove the necessity of the temple, perhaps, and to remove the necessity of certain kosher rules about circumcision.
Yeah, what's going on in the temple? Well, first of all, they are offering the sacrifice of animals. Well, Paul, who, by the way, was raised and trained as a Pharisee, which is it's a kind of a legal religious training.
Yes.
I mean, the Gospels give it a bad name, but it is a tradition. Now here you have a Jew who knows his tradition in the Greek world saying, in effect, we don't need animal sacrifices in the temple anymore. He also has the notion that the body is the temple, the human body. Now this is pretty, you don't need, when you can write like that, you don't need a gun and a sword.
It seems also very interesting because the fact that Paul makes that transition from the outward temple to the body being a temple, and transfers all that, all the physical, literal rules about sacrificing such to an inward personal
Yeah.
thing.
Uh-huh.
It's similar, it seems, also to what rabbinical Judaism did after the temple was destroyed, where they said, "Oh, it's no longer about the centering around this outward temple. It's centered around the Torah, which you must then learn and keep within yourself and follow within yourself and make yourself pure."
Yeah, and so Paul, in that sense, was a rabbi
Yeah.
in that tradition, and he was carrying it on out. You think?
Granted that when Paul was writing, the second temple hadn't been destroyed yet, so it seems like he may have been ahead of them on that.
Well, yeah. In fact, there's some apocalyptic literature thinking that the temple's going to be destroyed, and given Rome's propensity to do things like that,
Right.
it's not a bad prediction.
Right. I think it was around, according to Mac, it was around
70 AD, that it was 69 or 70.
It was around 69 to 70 when it was destroyed, but around 62 AD was around the time when the Pillars of Jerusalem group that Paul was addressing actually fled the city, because during that time you had a buildup of 3 different Jewish groups who were warring with each other for control. And that was why Rome came along to try to put an end to it. They surrounded the city, laid siege to it for 3 years. And according to Bart Ehrman and Elaine Pagels, they starved them out to a very great extent before finally pouring into the city and laying waste.
Yeah, it's important to understand. I think what you're saying is that Judaism in the first century was divided. They were divided among themselves, and Paul was one of the branches of this, or within one of the branches of this.
Right.
And the Sadducees were mostly temple-oriented and sacrifice-oriented, and they also made pretty much agreements with the invading government to make deals.
In order to preserve. They were much more willing, probably, than to preserve the system.
They were the more ultra-conservatives of that tradition. Paul would have then represented a more ultra-liberal position, if you can use those words. I don't like using those words that much.
In a sense.
But that's not political, but it's...
Well, the Christian movement, especially from the perspectives of, I think, Mark and Matthew, the texts, the perspective was that the Christian movement was a part of Judaism still. But they were simply the ones that were getting it more right. And it's only when you get to Luke and John, once the movement's really gone out to the Gentiles a lot more, that you really see a shift in the view where it starts to be that, okay, we're not just a small group of Judaism, we have now inherited their legacy and they're being left behind.
Yeah, John's probably dating about a 90 AD.
90 to 100, if I'm correct.
So
somewhere in there.
Yeah, if you put the prologue and epilogue on, it may be 50 years even after. It was a process. Right. But let's go, because we're talking about the composition of the Bible, and we've got to do this quickly. In the Hebrew Bible, we often think it just dropped in, but no, you have literature developing and growing.
Yes.
Now, the tradition that Moses wrote the first 5 books, most scholars think, well, no. First of all, it doesn't say Moses wrote it.
Right.
And nowhere does Moses say he wrote it.
Plus, Moses dies at the end of the last book, and it's recorded. And
even has the passage that Moses was the humblest of the men, which is not a very humble thing.
Statement to make about oneself.
You say at least the second humblest.
It would make sense that, someone who cherished him would have.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. And they did. That's whoever wrote it, or the composition of it, or several people.
Yes.
And the latest redactor or editor put this in.
Yes.
Now, it's important to understand that great literature does borrow heavily from previous literature. And the Bible, much of the Bible as literature is incredibly powerful.
Right.
But you can see, say, in the 19th century, a Christian novelist like Dostoevsky will borrow heavily from Shakespeare, from Charles Dickens, from Tolstoy, from other Russian writers, and heavily from the Bible. And I mean, you can list on and on.
Right, and when you look at the history of literature, or even expanding it out, story or myth-making in general, including even today's movies or films, everyone's trying to simply improve upon what's come before, or give a new twist to it.
Oh, and speaking of twist, take the First and Second Chronicles, which has rewritten First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, a good deal of it.
Yeah.
But it seemingly, your word twist makes sense. It gives it a view of the Bible from the priest's point of view. In other words, it takes all those stories and then does the spin on it. And so you've got, that's why you got First and Second Samuel, then you got First and Second King, then you got First and Second Chronicles.
Right.
And in the First and Second Chronicles, David looks not as bloodthirsty as he does in.
And a lot more nicer and kinder.
Yeah, and you can see they have modernized him from their point of view, making him not a mafia chieftain.
Well, that's like there's when you look at, for example, the story of Abraham and Isaac going up the mountain. In the Hebrew, the story is actually written by two different authors whose works have been interspliced. And what's interesting is that the older author, which, by the way, in case you don't know, or audience does not know, the way they can tell that there have been multiple authors at work within this text is that the form of the Hebrew is different, that it's centuries apart. There's been development over time. And what we find is that in the middle of the story, in fact, at the climactic point when Abraham raises his knife, the author identified as E, his writing ends, and then it's picked up by, I believe it's J. And J, when it starts from J, that's when the angel appears, stays his hand, speaks to him that congratulations, you've done right, and shows him a ram. But then it continues, and actually, the E part is actually also includes the part where it says, "Because you did not withhold your son from me." But the staying of the hand and the providing of the ram and the sacrifice of the ram is from the J source. Then when you get to the E source in the English, it says Abraham returned from the top of the mountain to his two servants. He returns alone.
Alone.
And the E source, after that, the very next portion of E that we come across says that that Abraham took another wife and had more children. And the E source never again mentions Isaac.
Yeah. Well, that raises the question, which we could be all year on this, on how do you tell how can we determine what's historical reality and what is a theological agenda, and what's entertainment storytelling. We forget that the early Hebrews also liked storytelling and entertainment.
Yes.
And why Shakespeare, for example, wrote what's called the history plays, Richard III and so forth, and they have some historical materials in them, the plays, but also they have fantasy, embellishment, and some of the great fiction. One physicist said it took him a long time to realize sometimes great fiction can tell you more truth than just plain facts. And I think that's what Shakespeare does, is he by writing these plays and taking the history and reworking it as a play, not saying this is history, but as a play, he brings out details about human nature. And parts of the Bible, it seems to me, do the same thing.
I would like to remind our viewers this is a call-in show, and we invite you to call in. Numbers on the screen. We'd love to hear what you think. If you have any information for us that you think's important, or if you even have books you've read or would like to suggest, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, communicate with us. Well, if you're tuning in, we're on this is the Freethought Forum. And it's a program by Atheists, Society of Knoxville, and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. And we also would like feedback. There's a Freethought Forum at yahoo.com. And also there's a phone number, it should be on the screen, or usually is. Yeah, we do have it on screen.
Yes.
So communicate with us. And we have some topics that the Rationalists of East Tennessee and the Atheists society will discuss. But right now we have an incoming call. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Do you have a name you go by?
Jeff?
Go.
Okay.
What's your question or comment? We'd be pleased to hear it.
Yes.
Well, it says, is the Bible historical?
Yes.
That's the question you have at the bottom of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Go.
of course it's historical. I mean, you got a question mark.
Okay.
Of course the Bible is historical. I don't think that's a question you're asking, though.
Would you?
Okay, let me deal with that.
Yeah, why are you saying that? Because it's historical, but why is that a question?
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you believe that the Book of Mormon is historical?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah, because it's in past history, in the 1800s.
In other words, you believe those golden plates really existed?
No, I believe that what their writings are in the 1800s is past history, so it's historical. Anything historical is past history.
Okay, that's. I think we're talking about we're talking.
But I'm saying I think it's the wrong question.
Okay.
Okay, that's your opinion. And what's your next question?
No, that's not an opinion. It's the wrong question.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe it's that we're thinking two different ways. We're thinking two different ways about the question. If what you're saying, which I think is what you're saying that the book itself was written at a time and that these people actually thought these things. I could agree with that. What Joe and I are talking
Past history is historical.
Okay, that's obvious. Okay.
What we are talking about, though, is the claims it makes about things that supposedly happened.
Oh, I just turned the TV on, is all. So I don't know what you've been talking about.
Well, that's pretty
all right.
clear. Okay.
That's all right.
We're saying the story of the snake talking in the Garden of Eden is not historical.
Right, and
That's
because it's in the history book of the Bible.
Well, that's what the whole issue is about. Okay.
I'm curious. How do you distinguish between what is a historical book and what is not a historical book?
Well, that's what I'm saying about that question. If Shakespeare wrote some things down back in his day, those books are historical books.
But
because they weren't written today.
Okay.
So they're historical. They're backwards.
Okay, but
you have to go backwards.
Okay. There's the next thing I would like to ask you is this: Do you agree with me? There's a difference between someone writing something back then and it sounds like you're saying historical, meaning it was written in the past about the past. Because
that's what history is.
Right.
Everybody watching the program already knows that.
Well,
okay.
But why is it a question?
Okay, here's the question. Are you ready?
Okay, ask me the question.
Well, I'm just putting it to okay. The question is, are some claims in the Bible or some claims in the Book of Mormon actual historical claims, historical facts that happened?
The spelling of accurate is that right?
Let me finish.
Just change it. Okay.
Let me finish my statement, then you can disagree.
Spelled it wrong.
Okay. In other words, if it makes claims that were historical, that they were historical facts, were they historical facts or not?
Right.
In which book are you talking?
Well, that's the question. We were talking about Chronicles.
Okay.
We'll talk now about the Book of Acts. Are you ready?
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Well, thank you for calling in. We're going to talk about the Book of Acts. Okay.
Well, ask me.
Well, no. We're on the program to talk about the Book of Acts.
I can answer your question on the Book of Acts.
Okay. Do you think Jesus went up in the air on a particular day into heaven? Just went right up.
Yes, 40 days after his resurrection. Sure. It's in the Bible. It's historical.
Okay.
Historical fact.
Okay, now, if there had been videos at that time...
They would have seen it.
Okay.
Okay, now we know where we disagree. Okay, that's all.
Let me
Are
ask
you
you.
saying that if they had videos, they wouldn't have seen it?
There would not have been, that would not have happened. Yeah, that's fiction.
I'm curious.
Well, then that's not true.
Well, that's
Sir?
where we differ. Okay.
That's not true, because for 40 days he walked the earth after his resurrection to prove that he was God.
May I ask you a question?
And he was seen of 500 at one time
May I
to
ask
prove
you-
that he was God.
May I ask you a question?
How can you discount that?
May I ask you a question?
It's hailing over here.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. How do you know that that actually happened and that it's not just made up?
Excuse me?
I'm asking, how do you know that that what the Bible claims is true? How do you know that that's true?
How do I know it's true?
Yes.
Yeah, you got.
Well, because for 28 years I was Catholic in the Catholic Church,
Okay.
and I was an altar boy, and there was nuns and priests in our family.
Okay.
And at age 28, a preacher came over to my house and showed me in the Bible, asked me if I ever been born again.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what he was talking about. So he
Okay.
explained to me how to repent of my sins and ask Jesus Christ to come into my heart and save me. And I didn't trust him. I didn't believe him.
Yes.
So
Okay.
they tried to get me to do this at the table at Brockton, Massachusetts. And I said, look, if this is the truth, they said, this is the truth. I said, well, if it is, I'll find out for myself. And I
Okay.
threw them out of the house.
Okay.
There was this preacher and the missionary.
Okay.
That night, September
I'll tell you what.
1971, by my bedside, I repented of my sins and
Okay.
asked Jesus Christ to come into my heart and save me.
And you became.
And my entire life was changed from...
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, he can find his own program. That's enough. Okay. Yeah. That's. Now let's talk about we're talking about the Bible is an attempt of people to try to solve various problems, like the problem of suffering. And there in the book of Job, you have this great literature attempting to solve this problem. Why is it people suffer so much if there is a good God watching over people's lives?
Before I respond to that, I do want to say one more thing to the caller. I do want to say that I appreciate that you did call in, and I appreciate that you did offer your opinions. And I would like to welcome you to call back in another time to talk more. And if you're willing to come see us at Barley's and are okay with talking
that
with
would
us,
be
I would
welcome,
like
yeah.
to welcome you to come.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have had more conversation with you, and hopefully we can have more in the future. But yes, I agree that the books in the Bible, one of the main questions they do try to answer is why we suffer. It's a very important and human question.
Yeah, if our caller had been, say, a born-again evangelical, he would not say that everything that claims to be history in the Book of Mormon would be history. And he could see that point. And what we're trying to say is we don't think everything that claims to be history in any particular book like the Bible necessarily is. It has to be investigated on its own grounds.
Oh, I agree. And
it may be that the book of Acts, for example, and in fact, this is one author who believes it's called Prophet with Delight. It's analysis of the book of Acts. He claims that the book of Acts is basically a historical novel. And a lot of the material in it is historical, and a lot of it is not historical. It's entertainment literature, very much like the literature that the Greeks had at that time. And we often forget much of the Bible is entertainment literature, not intending to be a scientific or a historical research material that you would expect of a historian. Also, we're getting back to the book of Job. The book of Job, I don't think it attempts to make a clear statement that this story of God and Satan in heaven having a conversation and almost a bet as to whether or not Job is going to keep the faith, I think that's a literary invention.
There are...
but it's trying to get across a problem and a way they're trying to solve the problem of why is it that a good person like Job would suffer.
There, when it comes to the book of Job, Martin Ehrman points out in his book about suffering that is titled God's Problem, how the Bible fails to answer our most important question, why we suffer. He points out that most people do not realize that the book of Job is actually composed by two authors, writings of two authors, and that each author actually has a different answer for why we suffer. The first two chapters and the last chapter, it seems, they're for one thing written in prose, whereas the middle chapter, about 40 chapters, are written in poetry and are these poetic dialogues. And it's interesting because Ehrman describes them as the folk tale and the dialogue, poetic dialogue. In the folk tale, the answer is with introducing Satan and such, that it's because it's a test of Job's faith to see if he can persevere.
It's a test.
That God doesn't seem to really know, perhaps, because not everyone back then believed God was all-knowing. The poetic dialogues, on the other hand, have a different response, where the author is trying to say through God at the end, when he's berating Job for even asking the question, it's basically saying there is no answer that you deserve to hear, and that you are not in a position to ask that question. You have no right to ask that question. And other reasons, by the way, to think why it's written by two different authors is that Job's response to God is different. In the beginning of the folktale, he's, as it's referred to by Ehrman, his wife tells him to curse God and die, and he refuses to curse at all, and says no. He's like, this is what is right. I will suffer through this. And in the last chapter, God tells him, you have. He says to Job's friends, Job has spoke right of me, whereas you have not. Yet, in the poetic dialogues, Job curses the day he was born. He says that at some points that God has no good reason, no reason at all to have done this to him. And God doesn't, in the poetic dialogue, say Job spoke rightly. Instead, it's quite, it seems angry.
Would you agree that the book of Job may have been written because there was a tradition, say, from Deuteronomy, that says if you live by the Torah, the law, you will prosper and your children will do well, and your life will be a pretty good life.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, I'm of the opinion, and various scholars are saying, that maybe this book was written to say that view is just too simplistic.
Right.
That life doesn't turn out that way. You could make a good case this. If you live by rules and regulations that are sensible, you increase the probabilities of having a better society and your life being better. But that doesn't guarantee you that everything is going to come out the way you had hoped.
Right.
And the book of Job is an attempt, it seems to me, to try to
answer the question,
to deal with the tradition of in the book of Hebrews. I mean the book of Deuteronomy. I wanted to mention the book of Hebrews, which was apparently a Christian writing to fellow Jews, and he seemingly is. I guess what I want to say is the history of religion, very similar to the history of science in one major respect, is a history of revisions. Problems come up that the tradition has not been able to deal with effectively or sufficiently. And so you can see revisions taking place. And you can do the whole history of just Christian theology alone.
Right. One of the examples of that, actually, is the rise of Christianity itself, as proposed by Mack and several others. He points out that during the time in which Christianity arose, prior to Jesus, in fact, even the historical figure of Jesus coming around, the Romans had conquered, most all of the civilized world, and what that meant was that all of these peoples who had formerly had these ethnocentric. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a caller.
We have a caller.
We'll go take our caller.
Yeah, go ahead. Our caller.
What name would you like to go by?
Lori.
Lori, go ahead, please.
I guess I just have a question. I mean, I'm not calling to argue with these guys.
Oh, that's okay.
But my question is, the guy that just called that you kind of hung up on, is how do you explain people's lives who have truly changed because they say they've accepted Christ into their life?
Okay, let's deal with that directly, okay, because it's a sensible question. You explain it the same way that people change from being a Catholic to a Protestant, or from being a Protestant to an atheist, or from becoming an atheist to a Hindu. Everybody in that respect has had a new birth. Let me explain what I mean by this. And it does change your life. And the reason for that is you pick up a new vocabulary, you start talking differently, you get new friends and new associates, you get a new group to go to, like the word church in the Greek is ekklesia, called out one. You call, and you get with people who are like-minded.
Okay, well, I guess I understand that. I understand you change your association, your environment, things change.
Yes.
But I'm talking about people who tell story after story, and people that I've known who maybe were alcoholics, who are drug addictive, and maybe even on their deathbed, and then they completely change.
Okay, I have explained, and see if you agree.
Okay.
See, people don't just change by magic. Okay?
I completely agree. People do not change by magic.
I can give you an uncle of mine. I won't give his name because he's not here to defend himself. But he was a dear, dear uncle to me. But in my childhood, I knew him as a derelict and a dangerous person. But he got religion. Are you with me? Now, it wasn't that just some magic took place. He got with people who watched him, so they kept him out of the drinking places, kept him away from people who got him with dope or anything else. Are you with me?
I understand that, but I'm talking about some dramatic changes that I've seen in people.
Well,
I mean, I work with different people in Knoxville who, once they realize...
go ahead.
And it's not even a realization. I mean, I'm talking about people who've truly been on their deathbed, who have accepted Christ and who have immediately changed. It's not the people, it's not the environment. And that's not, I don't know how you can...
Wait a minute. On the deathbed, are you saying immediate change? If they're on their deathbed, you're not talking about a resurrection. No.
No. I mean, I know of one story who a guy was on the street. I mean, I don't know how you can argue with somebody's story.
Well, you're not. See, what you're not arguing, we're not arguing the change. Are you with me? What we're trying to do is explain it in terms of details.
There are different explanations for changes. If someone is on their deathbed, one of the things that's going on with people when they're dying is that their brain is going to die.
Well, I mean, that's just one example. I mean, I guess it all was triggered when you kind of hung up on the guy who was trying to tell his story.
I understand.
Well, okay.
You can't argue if he has a story.
Let me tell you why we hung up. Sometimes a caller comes in, not often, and it's to take over the program. You see what I'm saying? Now here you're engaging in an intelligent, rational discussion, okay? And you're asking what seem to me to be intelligent, useful questions. What we want to do is raise the question when people make observable, detectable changes, how do you explain it? Now, I think you would agree with me that these kinds of changes often take place with or without religious belief. Would you agree?
Oh, it can.
Okay, that's all. So I'm trying to say, how can you explain, say, someone who is a derelict and he become, or say he was a minister who changed to an atheist and became a better man, not a worse, a better man. You see what I'm getting at? That can happen too. Now, in your culture, you may not know this, but in my subculture, if you want to put it this way, I've seen people change from a certain kind of religion to move to another kind of religion or to move away from religion. And the changes are real. I'm with you, you see. I'm saying these are real, observable changes. But what I'm trying to say is they are not supernatural phenomena. They are natural.
Well, I guess that's where I have to differ, because
okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Yeah.
It's a supernatural change that's happened to me, and it's through Christ living in me. So
let me ask you this: if a person who say is a murderer, but in India, and he is converted to a form of Hinduism, which is certainly not Christianity, and no longer is a murderer, do you classify that as a supernatural conversion?
No, I mean, I agree with you that people can change, and it's innately within us what's right and wrong. So there are many reasons that people can change, but I mean, my whole point in calling was that the hanging up on the guy trying to tell his story, you just...
Well, you can see why. See, I'm not hanging up on you because you can talk rationally, but I'm not going to sit here and just be an audience to a pontificator. You see what I'm getting at.
I don't agree with the hanging up on the man, because I would have liked to have heard what he had to say and try to locate something I could agree with him on and go from there. So I can understand what you're saying, that his story matters to him, and that if we're going to talk with him and come to an agreement or find any kind of agreement, it matters what he says.
Would you agree with me? If we had kept him on, we would not have been able to hear this lady talk.
Not necessarily.
Well, I'm now going to dismiss myself, and
Well, thank you for calling in, though. I appreciate your good comments. Okay. Yeah, we do have to make a decision on when someone tries to take over the program. We can't do that. There is intelligent conversation. This lady, I think, provided us a very good example. And she and I, and you and I, can differ, but we don't have to just shout at each other. Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed people falling in love sometimes change? Love songs, for example. If I can remember, there were birds in the air or the trees, and I never heard them singing till there was you. Now, that's a love song.
Yes.
But it's a conversion song. It's a story of a person whose life has been changed because he fell in love.
Sure.
So all I'm suggesting is that people do change, but not magically and not overnight. Now, where the two colors and we might differ is, and that's good to see that it is a difference, is whether or not these changes are supernatural. Mm-hmm. And I'm suggesting the world of nature and social structures is so deep and rich that we don't need a supernatural explanation.
Well, I would think that the best way to address it would be to ask what she means by, if you're still watching, caller, what you mean by supernatural, what it is for you that
that would be
that made it a supernatural experience, and how you could tell it was that and not something that is normal may not be the best word, but natural and occurring, that is explainable without invoking supernaturalism or God.
There's a third chapter of John is a major passage for the new birth phenomena, in which Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and he's talking about being born of water and of spirit. Now, these are two metaphors. You see, you aren't literally born of water. And what it means to be born of spirit, you and I know that's a broad word, can be used in a variety of ways. So we have to figure out, how do you translate this into ordinary language that makes sense? Okay, we got another call coming in?
Jeff calling back.
Hello.
Jeff?
Jeff, go ahead,
Is this
please.
you again?
Yes, it's me, Jeff again. But that girl that just spoke, and you asked you asked this question: is it supernatural?
Yes.
Absolutely, is supernaturally done by God in the person's life.
Okay.
Okay, let me
How
ask
do
you
you
this.
know?
Let me ask you this. When a person is converted from Christianity to Islam, is that supernatural?
Yeah, but it's of the devil.
Oh, I'm curious.
okay.
How do you know?
Okay,
How do you
okay.
know?
By the devil, yeah.
Okay, but may I ask you this?
Because there's only one God.
Okay, but let me ask you this. How do you know that it's supernatural and not natural?
Well, because of the supernatural evidence that goes along with it.
Go ahead.
What
go
is
ahead.
that
go
evidence
ahead,
that
go
you
ahead.
have?
Well, it's something that happens inside a person is supernatural. I mean, it has to do with the spirit of a man being born again by the Spirit of God.
Okay,
So
now
what's
And I was completely changed September 1971
Okay.
from a no good
Okay.
criminal
Okay.
in and out of jails.
Yes.
Had a record.
All right.
Police department always over my house, selling drugs, stuff like that,
Yeah.
I'm glad
putting
for you.
people in the hospital,
Okay.
and being thrown out of the Marine Corps
All right.
for hitting people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, and I've sat with psychiatrists, I have been to the Jewish synagogue, I was 28 years as a Catholic, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me.
Let me ask
I
you.
got saved the night, 1971, that night, by my bedside, alone, because I didn't trust those preachers.
Right.
Now let me ask you a question.
Because all I asked them, I didn't trust them. I thought they had an ace up their sleeve. I used to gamble.
Jeff?
I used to gamble on a lot of casinos.
Okay.
In your conversion.
It was an instant conversion.
Okay.
Yeah,
Has the conversion made it
Black
possible?
heart.
Has your
Black heart turned white.
Jeff, we don't have a hold button. We'd like to respond to what you're saying. I appreciate what you're saying. Thank
Okay.
you.
Here's a
Thank
question.
you.
Here's a question. In your conversion,
Yeah.
has it made it possible for you to engage in calm discussion with people?
Yes.
Okay, that's all. That's I'm glad.
May I present something?
Oh, you know why I'm a little bit like that? I had brain surgery back a few years ago. I had an aneurysm in my brain.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And because of that,
well, you feel very.
I'm sorry. Okay?
Well, okay. You feel lucky to be here, and I do too. So you.
I have panic attacks and things like that. And,
Okay.
and
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
You're okay, Jeff. I want to present maybe a counter to what you're saying respectfully.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to be disrespectful to you. I appreciate your sharing. I'm glad. Let me first say that I'm very glad that you are doing much better now, behaviorally and such.
Sure.
That's good. That is positive.
But that happened in '71.
Well, that's still good.
I understand, but I'm saying, but you're not still doing the things you're doing before, right?
At 1971, when the change happened in my heart by Jesus Christ, my whole life, I stopped. The next week, I stopped selling. I was buying marijuana by the kilo and selling it on the streets.
All right.
I stopped the marijuana. I stopped the pornography. I stopped going to the combat zone in Boston with the strip clubs and everything. I stopped it all. All the alcohol, everything was taken out of me. I couldn't believe it.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's what I wanted to know. All right.
I didn't do it on my own.
Okay, I'll accept.
The supernatural thing done in the.
I accept that's what you believe, and I respect that you believe that.
And everybody who gets saved gets a conversion experience like that.
All right, let me give you my case.
Okay.
All right, my case.
Yeah.
I was a Christian. I was raised to be a Christian. My parents raised.
Was a Catholic.
A Protestant.
No.
Is Protestant Christianity.
No, hold on. Let him give his.
Okay.
All right. So Protestant Christianity. I was raised to believe it. I studied the Bible. I even went to Johnson Bible College for a couple of years, and I continue to read and study on it. I am now an atheist. Now, before I became an atheist, I came to a point in my Christian beliefs that I thought and believed that it was necessary to kill everyone on earth.
Kind of like Islam.
No,
Or the-
I wanted to kill off Christians too. I wanted to keep people from reproducing so that people would not keep going to hell in future
Yeah.
generations. That I don't think was healthy.
No, I don't know where you got that thinking.
It's from, I got it from Ecclesiastes chapter 4 verses 1 through 3. That's what really spawned it. I would totally advise you to read it and
Well,
consider
somebody
it.
didn't explain to you it correctly is what happened.
Well, it wasn't an explanation. In fact, like I said, I went to Johnson Bible College and I read and studied about it there. And it is a result of thinking about, for example, like abortion and so forth, that later I began to think this way. Now, when I stopped being Christian, I stopped wanting to find a way to kill off all human beings. I became a better person by becoming an atheist in that case. So
You did.
I did.
Yeah, sure,
I
sure.
no longer wanted to see humanity dead. I really, at the
You
time,
have
was
to explain to me how you became a Christian.
I became a Christian because my parents.
How?
I'll
How
tell
did
you.
you become a Christian?
I will tell you. I became a Christian because my parents introduced me to the Bible, introduced me to Christian beliefs, and said, "This is what we believe." And they said, "We think this is true." And I was raised within that setting.
But how did you become a Christian?
Well, what
I'm
it,
explaining.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's how I became familiar with what Christianity was. And I believed it to be true because...
Well, no, so you don't become a Christian that way.
Hold on, I'm not finished.
Okay.
I wasn't baptized till I was much older when I considered it and I thought to myself, I think this is true. It wasn't very critical, to be fair, but I believed it to be true, and I believe that based on everything I had learned and seen up to that point, that it was the best explanation out there.
you were
There's only
baptized.
one way to become a Christian.
Okay, now that's...
There's only one way in the Bible to become a Christian.
What is that?
And that is, you got to repent of your sin
I did
and
that.
receive Jesus Christ as your personal Savior.
I did that.
Now, do you believe Jesus...
And if you've done that, then the Holy Spirit of God comes into your life
Okay.
and starts dealing with you about what's right and what's wrong in your conscience, through your conscience,
Now, let me ask you
Okay.
and
this.
changes your life to
We're running out
prove
of
it.
time.
Okay, we're right.
Or evidently you never became a Christian if you went from being a Christian like Oprah and then go to be a Muslim.
Okay.
I'm not a Muslim.
Well,
so-
okay, you...
And I don't think she is.
Yeah,
either.
we got to move on.
We are
can't
down
deal.
to
We
the
can't
last-
Guys
deal.
don't like to talk about anything that you can't answer.
Well,
No,
we
we're
like
out
to
of time,
talk.
honestly.
We just can't be an audience for a guy who goes on and on.
Well,
That's all.
All right,
I'm
well,
more
I'll
than
listen
willing
to
to
you.
talk. I'm more than willing to talk about that. The fact is, we are down to.
I mean, it has to be on your show. How's that?
Call us in. Call in on the
another
next
time.
time. We'll be here again. Okay.
We've
I
got only a
haven't been
minute
on your
left.
show if you dare to.
You get me to your church, and I'll get you
No,
onto
no.
my church.
We have,
Oh, no,
we have,
Well, and
Jeff,
shoot it
we
in.
have to go.
We'll go back
Jeff,
and
we
forth.
have to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
We
I
ran
have to
out of
hang up
time.
on you.
Sorry.
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 Call us again.
We are out of time. We have to go through the
Okay.
closing material.
Yeah, we got other.
Thank you for calling back. I did appreciate the conversation.
And maybe we'll get a chance to talk with him in the church, and it would be a good thing to have a dialogue. I think it's a good idea.
We need to say this. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Yeah, we're running out of time, and let's see. Go ahead and
No.
finish. I'm sorry.
Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 865-272-9060 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
Yeah. And next time we'll be here and call back. We'll be glad to talk with you and meet us sometime. It'd be at
we
Barley's. Yeah, that'd be a good time.
And we don't mind any questions. Feel free, please.
Yeah. Okay. Our time is up. Well, I want to say thank you for tuning in.